A little bit about myself. I have been interested in history and antiques and things like that from the time I was just a tiny little guy. And so it started off with my parents introducing me to an appreciation of antiques, but summer months like this when I didn't have school, I often got kicked out of the house and I went looking for arrowheads in the cornfields all around my property and the neighbor's property. And I've always sort of liked that sort of thing. But, you know, when you think about antiques, and I'm sure many of you have beautiful things in your home, antique pieces, but if you went to an antique show and you're thinking about a corner cupboard, and you said, well, you know, I need to take some measurements and I need to think about this a little bit. It's very expensive. The antique dealer will often just give you a business card and say, well, give me a call if you're interested. This is my number. And a lot of times on those business cards, what you see is embossed on the other side, which at the time I didn't know, but it's called a flyer. That's what was actually putting the twist into those fibers and making thread. So I taught myself to spin, and I kept going back to a place called the Manning's Hand Weaving School, a supply center, and buying materials and things like that from them, and never knowing that I could have inherited a butcher business, but my heart was in spinning and weaving, and then spent 38 years at the Manning's Hand Weaving School as an instructor. And so I've also collected antique textiles. So not only looms and spinning wheels, but coverlets and linens, and I have a particular interest, like all of you, in textiles that were produced here in York County, and particularly in this area. So I brought a number of things here with me here today so you can see it, and hopefully you'll have lots of questions. But if you can imagine some of those first settlers that settled in Lewisberry and Newberry Town in the late 18th century, you know, they're showing up, but we have to clothe ourselves. Later on, they were able to go to a dry goods store and buy clothing. But when they're first settling here, they need to be able to produce their own textiles. And so what do they produce? Well, they need sheep for wool. They also need to plant flax for linen. Believe it or not, they're also planting hemp. Many of the fields in these farms were growing hemp, which is sort of a coarser type of linen fiber. And they were using that for things like feed bags and really heavy-duty utilitarian pieces. And in York County, just into Lancaster County, there was even silk being raised. So Susanna Wright at the Wright House Mansion in Columbia, do I have that right? I think it was Columbia.
I'm not sure.
Well, Wrightsville area. She was a friend of Benjamin Franklin, and he found out about sericulture, or raising silkworms, in France, brought that over, and in their conversation over dinner one night, she decides, hey, this is going to be a good cash crop for the people in York County, in Lancaster County. I'm going to get people raising silkworms, and it didn't go over so well. It's a very, very different climate, and you need to have lots of mulberry trees. So if any of you are at home and you've got mulberry trees in the backyard, it could very well be that they are just mulberry trees that have been, you know, sort of passed along from the time of that time when they thought they were going to raise silk. So I brought a number of fibers along in their raw stage so you could actually see what it looks like. I think you all know what wool thread looks like, but this is some very, very pretty white wool. And I also brought some silk along. This is a silk cocoon, and what I want you to hear, shake it, it'll rattle. The little cocoon or the little pupa is still in there. You have to kill them first before you can reel the silk, but there are tiny little filaments in there, and that's what they were looking for. Here, let's start this on this side, so you can see what a silk cocoon looks like. Later on, they were bringing cotton, not raising cotton in this area, but they were using lots of cotton in the 19th century. And flax. This is flax. Doesn't it look like human hair? Yeah. Claude Debussy, the famous composer, wrote a piece called Girl with the Flaxen Hair, based on this. So when the early spring, you would plant flax seeds, And when the flax got to about this height, and it blooms with a beautiful little, almost like your top, purple blue flower, then it starts to die down, and they start processing it. So when you look at the flax straw in the field, it looks like wheat. But it's this fine, fine fiber that's in there that is producing the linen. So they're producing wool, they're raising sheep, they're growing linen, they're growing hemp. And there's such a controversy about growing hemp, and now they're starting to change the laws that we're bringing hemp back into the area. But the leaf looks a lot like marijuana. It is related distantly, has absolutely no chance of getting you high off of the stuff, but it was such an important cash crop for the people in the area. We even have a whole township over in Lancaster County called Hempfield Township, Hempfield High School. Hemp was a big, big producer in this area. So let's talk about what these things actually feel like. Pass this around, it's heavy. But this is hemp, and it's a feed bag. Can you imagine, how many of you, can I get a raise a hand, how many of you have animals on the farm?
My uncle did.
Yeah. So you go to the feed store, you get feed in a bag. It might be paper, it might be sort of this woven plastic mesh. This is how you got your feed years ago. And if you think about this, you're raising hemp fiber, you're processing it, you're spinning it, you're weaving it into fabric, and then you're putting your grain in there, and you're sending it off to the mill to be milled, and then getting it back. Well, to make sure that you get yours, you often had your name put onto that feed bag, so they knew it was yours. Now I'm going to pass this around, and if any of you are handy with a needle and like sewing, look at the construction of this feed bag. Even the little eyelets that a drawstring went through, just cinch this up, are so beautifully made. I mean, it's just amazing. Now, you went to all that work, you didn't throw things out. And this, for me, is a pride and joy.
It's beautiful.
Do I have the right one? Let me see. No, here we go. Again, hemp. We think we're all about recycling years ago. John Schaub, it's his 14th feed bag in his grouping of feed bags in 1855. Now, can you see the name was scratched out? If you went to this much work to produce fabric to put grain in, you didn't throw this out. As a matter of fact, what I love about this feed bag is there's actually holes in it that have been so beautifully mended. We get a hole in our shirt today, it eventually ends up in the thrift store or ends up in the trash. They mended this. And it was so important that it then was passed on to another person, and here he put his name on it in 1866. So think about 1866 and what was going on at that time period. We're looking at the Civil War era. Here we are in July, and Dami, you just recently were doing reenacting over in Gettysburg. This feed bag was around at that time period, and I could still put grain in it today and take it to the mill. Feel how heavy it is. Yeah. So then you fill it with corn or wheat, and how heavy it must have been to lug around. It is pretty amazing. Yeah. But not only was this linen used for feed bags, things such as that, but it was also for fine fabric. So the finer, the flax is sort of going around here, you can see how fine that is. You also wove fabric for household linens. Now, this is known as a show towel. A show towel is a fancy towel, and a young lady might embroider on this to show her embroidery skills. And this never got used. You never wiped your hands on this. This went onto the parlor side of your living room area in the house. And in the Pennsylvania German culture, often they had church in the house. So when families would come to the house and you've got a young man, he's probably 16 years old, and he's looking at this young lady's things, he's might thinking, she'd make a good catch. What I love about this is 1823. 1823, folks. And look at all the skills that she had. She was probably maybe 12 or 14 years old, but she knew to do cut work and then rework all those threads on top of it. And look how fancy this is.
Amazing.
So against a dark background, really something else. So please take a look at it. Look at the stitching in that. I have a granddaughter who's 11. There is no way she would do this. No way. Here's another one that I think is pretty special. And AH. This one actually has little tabs in the corner. So you would put this over maybe a couple of nails hanging on the door, but a different weave structure known as huck lace. You might have heard of that type of fabric, but here she initialed it very prominently with AH on here. Now, just going to did I bring? There's another one I wanted to bring. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring that. But you had to spin all of this. Now, today I did not bring a spinning wheel in, but it would not have been unusual for young kids to also learn how to spin on a spindle. So all around the world, even still today, people are spinning yarn on a spindle. And it's just a shaft with a wooden plate on here, or it could have been stone. I have some examples at home that have stone. This is called a whorl. And that stone whorl would have been used for basically the same thing. But, it's like 1,200 years old. It's, from Europe. I have some lead ones that are Roman. But once you get the thread started in here, this is wool. I'm going to turn the spindle, and as it turns around, it's putting twist into that fiber and creating a thread that you can use. Fabric for your household or a feed bag. No wonder they were precious and saved them all. When you watch the farm show, you can see they're all there with spinning wheels and they're working like crazy. Yeah. And it always baffles me how in 2.5 hours they can go from an empty loom to a shawl. And it's just such a short period of time, but you've got a number of people working together there. Yeah, they do that. All right. To put color into their pieces, look how colorful these coverlets are up front over the altar. They were using natural dyes, folks. Commercial dyes didn't come in until about the 1860s. You go to Joann Fabrics this afternoon, there are all kinds of dyes that you can dye for your fabric. Knit dye, tulip dyes, get your kids doing tie-dye, that sort of thing. But years ago, all the dye had to be extracted from plant material. So we have blue from indigo. We have things that might be fustic. Now, fustic is a plant that's sort of related to like the mulberry. We also had some other golds in here from Osage orange. Do you know about the Osage orange in this area? You'll see them every fall. These big sort of what looks like big green grains are laying alongside the highway. They're not using that fruit. They're actually using the interior wood part to extract the dye. And then other colors, but look at these beautiful reds. They could be obtained two ways. You could be growing madder, M-A-D-D-E-R, and it takes about 7 years for the roots to mature, but you're boiling them up, you're extracting that dye out of it, and then you're dyeing your yarn with that. Or another possibility is you would purchase cochineal. And cochineal is actually a parasitic insect that grows on cactus. So it didn't have it around here, but you could import that in from Mexico or from the Southwest. And you take these little bugs, you grind them up, and it produces the most beautiful red dye that's permanent. It doesn't come out. So when I look at a lot of these coverlets that you see right here, they would have been dyed with cochineal, the blue indigo, and maybe the gold with even things like onion skins. Maybe some of you have dyed Easter eggs with onion skins. That would have been used for that as well. So they're extracting beautiful colors out, weaving these fabrics up. And Donnie, I'm going to ask you, because I don't know for sure, but I understand on Bennett's Run, like on the corner of York Road and Miller Road, there is what is a home now, but maybe it was a mill, and I understand it was called a fulling mill.
I believe so.
So if that's a fulling mill, what's a fulling mill? Well, you would have woven your blankets, but you would have taken it to that miller who would have then processed them and bring up this beautiful sort of nap on the surface of your blanket. So they would have washed them and brushed them and made them nice and soft for you. So I'd like to know more about the people who live there and what remnants they might still have. Now I brought some coverlets along here today. And what I love about these were not woven by people like you and I. We would have had simple looms to produce these simple textiles. But around the 1820s in this area, weavers were buying what is known as a jacquard head. So jacquard was a French inventor. He invented this apparatus that sat on top of your loom and could give you many, many more complex patterns. When they came up with this, everybody wanted one of these coverlets. And weavers in this area as well, yes, I want one of those jacquard heads to put on my loom. So the first one that we're looking at here on the left-hand side was done by Jacob Darren in 1841. And look at the name right below it, Hake. That's a pretty common name around this area. So 1841, you guys did the math on how old that is, but Jacob Darren lived in Strinestown. I would love to know where his home is, but I have found his gravesite. So it's just down off of the Susquehanna Trail on the way down to York. So he and his wife, and I believe her name was Elizabeth, and he was a coverlet weaver at that point. Now, I have two coverlets right here. Martin Brenneman, Washington Township, York County, 1847, and it was done for Lucy Ann Trossel. And then Martin Brenneman did this coverlet as well. And look how elaborate. Look at the distal finks and the birds. But Martin Brenneman, York County, 1836. And it says fancy for Sarah Prowl. Well, I'll tell you a little story which is really rather cool. I think, okay, that was supposed to happen. I'm driving home from work one day, and I'm near Dillsburg. And there's a little church called the Barron's Church, sort of near Franklintown area. And many of my people are buried in that churchyard. So I went to pull in and say howdy do to all my dead ones. And went for a walk down this aisle of tombstones, and there is Martin Brenneman, his wife Elizabeth. So I often write for magazines talking about textiles, and I took the coverlets over there and draped them over the tombstone as sort of a remembrance to him. You know, we've had many, many, many very intelligent but also talented people living in this area producing great textiles. And there's a white one that's a little hard to see on the end, but it was woven down near Shrewsbury. So my goal is sort of to go around and see how many York County coverlets that I can collect before I pass them on to my daughter, Sarah. All right. Can I ask, do you have any questions about this? Yes.
What cemetery is Martin Brenneman in?
He's buried in the Barron's Church yard, right down from Franklintown, or actually on Barron's Church Road. Are you familiar with the area?
I don't really know where Barron's Church is. I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a little Lutheran church, just down from Franklintown. I'm sure we could Google it and
Well, when I'm wondering is because my family is Brennan, my mother's family is Brennan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from Lewisberry.
Oh, you should probably have a Brenneman coverlet. Yeah. Yeah, actually Martin Brenneman worked for quite a number of years near East Berlin. That's why Washington Township. So he was over there. And one of my students, she came in one day and she said, well, I learned to weave because I think this would be sort of a fun thing to do. She said, but my husband and I bought this old farmhouse and we're restoring it. Part of it's stone, part of it's log. You got the picture. She said, but there was this little building in the back, and she said, it was dilapidated and in bad shape, so we had a bulldozer come in and push it over. Pushed it over, but in the foundation were all these very, very long metal pieces that are actually what they call a heddle. And it was his loom parts had fallen down through the floorboards and were buried down underneath there. She's still weaving. She's still a good weaver, but the fact that she actually lived in his house is amazing to me. Yes?
Was it common for the person making the coverlets to always put the receiver's name on it, or is that only if they're gifting it?
For the person who is going to be receiving it. And so very often it was for somebody who, like a wedding present. Okay. And they're in incredible shape. A lot of times, sometimes you'll find one that was really well used, but a lot of times they're in very, very good shape because they were put in trunks and not used.
Right, like a hope chest.
Yeah, like a hope chest, exactly. But, you know, the things that I can weave on the equipment that I have is nothing as elaborate as that. So if you could have something like that, that was really amazing and that colorful. Yeah. And they had a heyday, I think, like everything, you know, like Lego warmers. They're out of fashion. These went out of fashion. So around 1870, nobody wanted them any longer. It's a shame. Yes. Other questions? Yes.
The letters on the feed bags. Now that wasn't weaved in. It felt like it was painted on.
It was painted on. So you would have had a metal template that would have been cut out. Okay. And like you would have, you know, for signage and things like that. And then that's India ink. And so that was all worked into the fabric, and it's not coming out. It is in there permanently. You know. Any other questions? No?
Oh, I haven't.
Yes.
So if someone wants to start collecting things like this, is it just something that you're lucky you find at an antique store? Is there a place that you go to find them?
These things?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Antique stores, that's about the best place to go for it. So I have found a lot of things over in New Oxford. Okay. That whole area is full of antique shops and malls and things like that, so you sort of go through. But as you start studying, then you start to understand about the weave structure and other things. And eBay, I'm constantly looking at eBay just to see, you know, what's coming up. And sometimes you find some real treasures. And right from here. But the story is, how did that coverlet that I'm interested in buying end up in Fresno, California? Huh. Yeah. And it belongs here. I'm sure there's many things like that happen, but they travel around. And if I can bring them back home, I try to. Yes?
What's the value of those?
Well, that's a good question. You know, about 10 years ago, it might have been worth $1,200. Now it's worth about $150. People are just not interested in them any longer. If you see, and of course, you know, people are working at this time of the day, but younger people don't seem to have an interest in it. I am so glad to see, you know, somebody like my daughter who's taking an interest in this and following right behind me. I am thrilled to pieces to find Dami and her friends who are interested, who want to collect these things and take care of them. But when I talk to my friends who are of our age, they go, yeah, my kids don't want my things. You know, you can keep the china. We're casual. We don't need a service of 20, you know, rolled Royal Dalton or anything like that, or even these beautiful old textiles. So, yeah, unfortunately the market's down, but I'm still collecting. And when I can find it in an antique shop, I snatch it up, and if it's different than anything else, I get it. And I've been teaching for many, many years, so it's been nice to be able to have somebody come to class and to show them 5 or 6 different examples of maybe the same sort of article, but in different weave structures, and see how they were different. And then think about the person who wove them and what their lives might have been like. The show towel that I showed you that was embroidered, and I'm sorry I did not bring the one along. On eBay, that was a great question. On eBay, I typed in show towel, Pennsylvania German show towel linen. And what popped up was a towel in a style that I've been looking at for years and years and years. Now again, imagine this is done by a very young girl. And the towel reads, and of course I hit the button, I bought it right away, but it reads, Sarah Kreider is my name, and Lattimore Township is where I reside. Now, it goes on to say, when I am dead and in my grave and all my bones are rotten, when this you see, remember me lest I be forgotten.
Wow.
She's 12, 14 years old and thinking about what her future is like. And I'm holding a piece of fabric from the 1820s and thinking, I wonder what ever happened to her. You know, did she go on and get married? Did she have 12 or 15 kids? What was her life like? It's those type of things that keep me going and collecting these sort of things.
That's
You
cool.
know.
Did you ever look it up at Ancestor.com, her name or anything?
I did, and you know, even sort of these folks too. And so I might have, you know, like Lydia, but it's her maiden name. So sometimes that doesn't help you to go on, but if I have an idea where it's from, like the name Hake, oh my gosh. When I was a little boy, we went to Hake's Mill, you know, and got feed. So, I mean, were they related to them at that point?
Is that Hake's Mill or Hike's Mill?
That was Hake's Mill, but there is a lot of Hakes. Mr. Hake, the sawmill,
Yeah.
it might be related to them. Yeah.
Can
Yes,
you
Don.
tell us a little bit about the Redstone Glen and the school that you and your daughter run?
Well, I just happens to have some information. Take one and pass
Look
it
at
along.
that.
Yes, look at that. There we go.
Thank you.
When we left Manning's, when they decided to retire and close, we knew that we were not done. And so we looked around for property where we could continue teaching weaving and spinning and other textile arts. So we found a place just off of Pops Ford Road. It is called Redstone Glen, and if you go down Pops Ford Road, we're the very last property down there. And it was owned by Bonnie Bissett and her sister, Becky. Sarah was able to acquire Bonnie's house as well as Becky's property as well. So there's about 50 acres and 2 houses on the property where we teach classes out of. But the nice thing is the one house can be used as a guest house. So we have people coming from all over the world, and they can stay there and they can go out for lunch or get dinner, and then they can use the house to stay and make their own meals and things like that. But we teach spinning, weaving. It's ongoing all year round, and Sarah's doing a great job with it. So I'm planning on actually retiring in October, and I'm going to come back for guest appearances in the summer months. So yeah, I'm headed to Florida to find out about Seminole textiles.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, folks, I thank you so much for asking me to come over and talk to you about these type of things. And yeah, if you have other questions, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate
you're
it.
welcome.